Lords of the Fallen is a tale of sorrow, dark truths hiding just behind the surface, and a cruel fate that we can't escape. So I'm playing with only Radiant magic because looking on the bright side isn't just thematic, it's more or less required. After battling the character creator, I started off as the Holy class, because I need the associated magic, because I ain't using weapons or items that deal damage. So, yeah. There are some minor exceptions made in terms of using the lantern to deal with enemies that can't be beaten without eliminating things, but it's odd. And for those that are unfamiliar with the game, let's take a step back. Or a step through. See, Lords of the Fallen takes place between separate worlds. While the last game had similar, this one has them overlapping. To see into the other, you simply have to lift your lantern. It's heretical in nature and super eldritch. Personally, I hated the idea on a mechanical level going in, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from enjoying what else the game had to offer. You can also die to go to the other world, which is used to traverse, puzzle, and find hidden loot that is incredibly detrimental to miss. Being here, though, gets progressively more dangerous, and staying here is ill-advised. You can only return to the game's version of bonfires and small totems, all the while being chased by continuously spawning mobs. Odd choice for the genre. The Umbral Realm is maybe a bit repetitive in themes, but those themes are really cool. I'm a sucker for some Eldritch horror. Truth be told, if I could have started with Umbral magic, that would be the video you'd be watching, but I don't have the time to beat the game just to unlock a new starting class to start a run. As such, this is my first playthrough for the title. The first boss of the game is more or less a formality. While I did level up, I don't think it's even remotely required to get through. My current spell is every basic bolt spell from everything ever, except it also builds up a status every time I cast. This was an issue exactly 0 times through my 41 hours with the game. Immediately after, though, is the Joker from the end of Arkham Asylum? I don't have the mana to deal with this, but that's fine. It's one of them you're supposed to lose bosses. One that's after the lamp that I carry, because this is the most important lamp to a game since the beacon from the Haunted Mansion on the original Xbox. The one that nobody played. It didn't have anything to do with the film, and it was really fun when I was younger, I swear. Great, now I feel old. Almost as old as Harkin here. Yeah, he's back, because this game is a sequel despite the title, and being told by a lot of different people that it was going to be a reboot. You're fooling absolutely nobody with that Iron Wayfarer thing you've got going on. I made my way through the typical village-esque setting, went to level up, and found that the game calculates things oddly. A lot of this game is odd, but it would actively display numbers wrong regularly, saying that I would gain more spell power than I actually would on level up. This was the second time I had to get to plus 12 spell power, and with levels already costing a ton from the get-go, at least with how slowly I can farm, that hurt. Seeing as mana doesn't regenerate though, and there are enemies galore, I spent most of my time just running past things. Only getting it back when I stopped at Vestiges, which, by the way, have a full load screen, a relatively long one, just to restore my stuff and respawn the resource fodder. Then, though, would come pain. And not just because all of the penance, whatnot. Also, these themes definitely aren't for everyone, but this is really cool. And if you disagree, that's okay, I can respect that. What I can't respect, though, are these frame rates. You may notice the game's performance being inconsistent throughout the video. Similarly, the visuals as a whole, I was constantly changing them, even to the end, just trying to get the game to run consistently enough to play, let alone record. My system absolutely shouldn't be struggling on this. In some parts, it was genuinely painful. There were boss fights that were easier than a particular flight of stairs that I was trying to go up at one point, because the game was lagging so hard that I just couldn't walk. My ability to walk short distances without dying was genuinely in question, which would prove to be my downfall, because the game's frames were being sent individually through the mail in 3 to 7 business will get back to yous. But I wanted to press on. I needed more mana. I needed more damage. I sat for hours, incredibly tired, hanging out in the Discord, link in the description by the way, just farming levels here. The damage increase was negligible to say the least. The mana was not a lot better. What we discovered, though, is that some of these enemies have a really low chance to drop consumable items that give you a temporary mana regen. So, already hitting the soft cap for my damage, I hoarded like the run depended on it, because it already did. The fight itself started out as me trying to simply stay back from the problem, which worked quite nicely for a while. She does have some dangerous ranged options, but more so in phase 2. I would alternate between slinging spells and chomping on some mana stones, always trying to get away from her, though phase 2 has some more dramatic choices to choose from. Truth be told, it was an easy fight. The amount of invincibility frames you get on dodges is more than generous, and she's not particularly complicated. maybe a bit much for a first real boss, but this is far from my first rodeo. That being said, the stress wasn't so much about the fight itself. I was literally shaking throughout because the only way to get more of the mana stones I was using was to spend even longer farming for them. And the thought of doing so made me want to cry. Is that meant to look like claymation? Well, either way, the boss that took hours of my life was now one among many NPCs that would mildly help the run in the hub area that literally never ran well. Bright side, I can now buy mana stones. They're expensive, but they're guaranteed, and that's good enough for me. All in all, a massive stress off my shoulders. Regardless, I'm being sent to cleanse 5 beacons or whatnot for holy reasons. Something about the Rogar, which are just fiends. They honestly had a lot less impact than the general umbral things going on, but Rogar are the main antagonistic force here. Or at least, sort of. There are a ton of bosses that are just humans, and honestly, I'm more okay with that than I thought. There's a lot of theming around the corrupt church. Everything has a grimy sort of blasphemous vibe. And I still haven't gotten around to blasphemous, but it's pretty sick. And no, I'm not just saying that because of her helmet. The boss itself is pretty easy to handle though. Her moves are telegraphed well, and her ranged attacks are easily stopped via pillars in the arena. The rest is just dancing through her moves, which, again, the iframes are really generous. Afterwards, though, came some more vertical traversal, and while it was a neat area, it wasn't a good one. I think one of my more fundamental issues with the game is the map design. They're all pretty, but they lack character. They don't feel unique. The umbral repetition made it begin to feel more familiar and dull than cold and alien, but it's very distinct. The mortal realm is typically fine, at best. What's much nicer, though, is the fact that I'm already to a pretty sizable catalyst upgrade. By killing these spiky boys, I have a low chance to receive a new thingy to cast spells through, which is a hell of a boon because my current one is unsurprisingly pretty bad. It just took a good handful of tries, and eventually I was back to my adventure, which, by the way, includes mandatory jumping sections in a Souls-like. This genre has, what, like one good jump button between any of the titles, and this isn't that one. You do usually get put back at the cliff's edge if you fall to your death, though, once per life, which made things at least a touch less stressful. The safety net was nice, even if the controls aren't. I did a lot of exploration to find the boss item bowl that is incredibly easy to miss, and went to pick up a new spell. It'll see its time eventually. From there, I went to do a boss that I didn't even need to consider doing for a while, and it's incredibly easy. Super tanky, unbelievably so for how early I found it, and yes, I know I'm not expected to go this way yet, but it takes over 2,000 damage for falling, and the AI is more than happy to repeatedly follow me up the stairs and over the edge. That's this whole fight. If you want to really complicate it, there are some mobs that you can ping down so they leave you alone, but the rest is done via gravity. Or that is, until the boss got sick of being cheesed and refused to move at all. No worries, I've still got plenty of mana to deal with you there, bud. Afterwards, I went to try to collect some stuff, and faced an incredible amount of pain in the form of some of the game's core mechanics. There are so many enemies. In the Umbral, more will just keep spawning in, and in the Mortal Realm, there are already an absolutely monstrous amount of enemies in almost every encounter, and it's overwhelming in the worst possible way. Most of the enemies aren't hard, they're arguably even overly simple, but there are also so many of them that you have to deal with being attacked from several different directions at the same time, and if I had a nickel for every time I just got surrounded to the point that I couldn't physically move in any direction, but also got attacked so frequently that I got stunned out of any attempt to cast a spell or heal, leaving literally only one possible outcome, well, I'd have a lot of nickels. But this game's lock-on is quite possibly the single worst I can remember using in multiple decades of gaming, and I played Rising Revengeance. With enemies in the center of the camera, it'll still snap your perspective around to face nothing at all. Often I found myself having to try 4 times just to walk onto a stationary enemy. And as you can see, I clearly have no control over which thing I'm walking onto, because I just want to pick up an item and leave, but that's not really an option. And before you say it's prioritizing enemies which favors the player, no, it doesn't, because in other encounters I got exactly the opposite. It refused to target enemies that were actively attacking me, favoring random bits of the environment and getting me killed. This lock-on is horrendous. And why do games still force you to reset the camera when there's nothing to lock onto? I don't want camera snapping in any game. The fact that it's not only the default, but mandatory is dreadful, and I will die on that hill. Giving up on that path because there are things I want to see in life other than the load screen you get for dying, I eventually found my way to a boss version of a basic mob that was one-shotting me earlier. Pretty sure that should be the other way around, but I digress. She has dogs that won't leave you alone, and a bow. You literally just need to avoid her arrows and hit her when the dogs aren't actively hitting you. I took one hit from one of said dogs and beat her on my first try. Shameful on her part, really. Luckily, I wasn't hurting for long in terms of fighting something more substantial. I was fighting a big fella that would let me get a lot more use out of my new spell. It brings in a couple angelic allies that would attack once before leaving. Sometimes it would only summon one, or none at all, at the full mana cost, and also holding you in place for the cast time. So thanks for that being incredibly inconsistent, and I hate it. And realistically, the damage it deals is slightly worse than just casting normally, but it does that damage faster, and also it's satisfying to use. They either do a ground slam or a pew pew, and we love pew pew. The boss itself is big. I started off by doing really well against it during my testing to throwing really hard. To put it simply, you're not spacing this thing. In no world are you spacing this thing. The same can be said for most bosses, but this one especially. So the only alternative is to dodge, which wasn't so bad except for when I sucked. Burning through mana and mana stones alike though, at breakneck speeds, my final attempt went pretty well. I may not be good at Souls-likes, but this thing isn't good at sustaining laser fire. All in all, not so bad. I stopped in to see this guy to hand in a bunch of items because I need to complete his questline, and it's awful. This man needs me to find more random objects from around the world than the British Museum. I went through a swamp area that was full of enemies, and I like swamps well enough, but navigating this place is awful. Everything looks the same, and while it's sort of interesting to walk around the waterbed without water, the novelty wears off really quickly. Credit where it's due, though, the enemies are the thing that poisons you instead of it being the swamp. Before long, though, I was at the first beacon, and is that the tree sentinel? Oh, my mistake. He may look like the tree sentinel, but he hits like a freight train. With several one-shot abilities, I figured I really wasn't going to make any progress on it at my current rate, and I really didn't want to try to fund the mana stones necessary either, so I left.
You look tired, friend. Haven't you already suffered enough?
No, I'm just getting started. My adventure would send me back through some places to, for instance, retrieve the blacksmith that you can easily miss, so I could at least sort of upgrade my catalyst to do more magic damage. I didn't invest all of my materials into it because this was far from my final item of choice, but it made a pretty sizable difference. I jumped through a bunch of hoops to locate another NPC that was going to be vital to my run because there were far too many of those, and the majority of this quest is just running through a bunch of incredibly easy to miss side areas that were painful to explore, because the time it takes to get back to any given spot is long, and the time to die on messing up is short. I spent another long while farming vigor to come back with a higher level than ever, because you don't de-level. Anyway, the game made some rather odd choices regarding stats. Not necessarily bad ones, mind you, but odd ones. See, both magic stats affect your damage with the associated school of magic, and both increase your max mana. Your health and stamina stats also affect your equip load, which works out great because I finally invested in health for a change. As a result, I can also come in decked out with some genuinely defensive armor. It's kind of weird. I could survive a hit, which meant I could survive his long horse riding sections without much issue. And yes, I know you can knock him off it with the lamp. Didn't feel very in the spirit of things to use it when I didn't need it though. Because that aside, I could just ping him a whole lot. Spoilers for the remainder of the video, the starting spell never stopped being relevant. And while things like healing stones were really nice for fights that do have a lot of delay tactics like him, I was eventually able to brute force my way through the viney bugger. And now, I may not be a holy person, but I'm a fill your demon god with holes later down the line. To do that, I'm gonna need to burn a bunch of moths or something. I don't know, magic is weird. Afterwards, I accidentally stumbled into the next boss fight. If you can call it that. It was mostly me either having the angels beat them up or hurling bolts. This is one among many enemies that are basically just mildly glorified basic foes. So, go ahead. Rattle them, girls. Afterwards, I decided to go back and fight a thing that I didn't really want to, but it was standing between me and a spell. It takes massively reduced damage, except when it opens its face to shoot spells at you, which it leaves open for a pretty long while, but I found the Blessed Reflections to be a great fit for it. The damage really isn't better than multiple casts, but it's quick, and quick is what I need. This poor bastard, on the other hand, needs gravity. Not sure he has it quite figured out yet. A hop, skip, and some dangerous metaphorical jumps through some caves spat me out in another boss fight because this game is littered with them, and I'll bite. When did this game get easy? It has its moments, sure, but this is supposed to challenge me? This took one mana stone on my first try. A lot of bosses were first tries. I think I died more to just getting overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of enemies and the frequency at which they attack in large numbers. Why, I wouldn't even be afraid if the first boss that you were supposed to die to was to return and demand the lamp. Oh no, that thing I mentioned. Wait, no, why is he difficult? Hold on just a minute. Slow down! Or just leave after killing me? Odd. I'm sure he won't be returning later in the game at all. Truth be told, with everything else the way it was on release, I just assumed it was a glitch. I then entered a place where everything was burning, and if you're asking why I'm not using the same school of magic as her, look at my last few uploads. I figured people would probably want at least a bit of a break before heading back into the Inferno. May its embrace bring peace upon ye, O Harbinger of Cinders. Also, boss was easy. Probably more accurate to call her like, I don't know, Sparky? Because Infernal is really overselling it. And anyone who knows me, or who's heard me say it a million times, knows that I am awful at navigating. But I spent probably well over an hour just wandering through this hellhole because somewhere there's a path forward, but I couldn't find it to save my life. Turns out you have to be in the Umbral and go to a really specific place, which is lovely, because I was mostly in the Umbral, but the sense of direction in this game is non-existent. In areas, after areas. If you meet a dead end, you better hope you were paying attention to a line of dialogue from 3 hours ago or random notes that are vague and could easily be assumed to either be side quests or lore pieces. Can we please just normalize quest logs? Afterwards was a giant boss that had some interesting hitboxes. Only a couple of his attacks could actually do anything to hurt me here. But he's not that easy to cheese. He floods the place with lava, so you do have to actually move. Up on the walls, it's mostly about either dodging attacks that spawn directly on you or just throwing a ton of damage his way while he slowly lumbers over to you. At which point his attacks are slow enough that you can just move somewhere else to continue doing the same. Then he has a really long telegraph for a move that I think burns the whole place unless you're under cover. But I've played video games before and didn't get hit by it once via conveniently placed architecture. All in all, super easy. That being said, this fight seems absolutely awful for a melee run. Not sure what that would look like, but I don't envy anyone using bonk sticks instead. I took its eye to a lady to progress her quest line, where I would have to collect a specific set of armor to wear to, I guess, pay respects, and despite not pressing F because I play games on controller, it would prove good enough for her, and it progressed even further. Cool. So I was roaming around a city that was full of what looked like ash. It led to an obligatory mine, and I found the single most helpful thing I'd gotten in the whole run thus far. With it, I can finally get some passive mana regen. But to get that, I first needed to unlock the blacksmith and then go find a specific item in another incredibly specific location, but who's counting the number of weirdly missable things anyway? Before that, I would stop by to take on a spooky ghost with sharp things. Okay, 2 spooky ghosts with sharp things. Wait, 3? I don't know, there were a lot of spooky ghosts and sharp things involved. It was a whole thing. These absolutely are basic enemies though, and as annoying as they can be, they're whatever. The fact that the reflections do an AoE slam meant it was even a little bit mana efficient. After, I dropped in to get the regen I'd been after for the last many hours of content. I applied the rune to a shield that I would keep on my back, never to block, never to parry. Immediately after the spooky ghosts, spatially speaking, and also in a genuinely really cool little hanging cage sort of place, I would fight the Skin Stealer. And as a quicken. Hard to really do much while also avoiding things. Weirdly, I think their aggression would have made melee easier, but I could be wrong. That being said, the fellow clearly wore themselves out in the first bit of the fight because they just didn't have it in them to keep fighting. And with how frequently things broke on me favoring the enemies, I didn't really care enough to unbreak it to harm me. Say hi to your god for me. I'll be visiting them soon. I got to another part of the Ash City for the game to confirm that Harkin was Harkin all along. A twist, to be sure. After finally doing more of the prisoner's questline, she sold me the single greatest ring that I could possibly have gotten my hands on, and now I have 2 stacks of mana regen. And to my friend who was so kind as to provide a lot of assistance in researching the run as it was going on, and who was chosen to be referred to exclusively as, and I quote, that bitch, thank you. I would go on to cleanse another beacon, but not alone. Never truly alone. This was genuinely a really rough experience for me, and most of it wasn't even off the back of the challenge itself. There are a lot of reasons to do something of the sort, but the fact of the matter was that I had started off this journey. I wanted to see it through. Or at least, part of me did. It was that part of me that had to persist, despite all of my aches and pains when faced with the trials before me. Though the excitement had long since faded, there was work to be done. It wasn't an option anymore. And as miserable and, frankly, hopeless as I'd become during the lower points and monotony of the run, those around me didn't lose faith. And if that's all I had, it's what would fuel every step. To me, this is a very sad game. One that I didn't even want to play by the end, but in every hardship lies a story. I have seen the light, and it is glorious. This is far from the hardest thing I've ever done. This isn't the lowest I've fallen, nor the strongest I've had to be. Those are tales for another time, for this one is different. This is of a time that I didn't have to be my best. I've met so many wonderful people, shared so many moments that I'll continue to treasure. It is they who illuminate the darkness. It is we who share joy through heartache and triumph alike. I may not believe in gods nor ghouls, but I believe in them, for I have seen their light, and it is glorious. Now, while I really didn't like the enemies nor encounters that came with the place, the cold and unforgiving feeling that came from this section of the game was really cool. Too many games go lava-themed. Lava's so overdone. I want more ice. And grass levels. They don't get enough love. Green is nice. Feeling rejuvenated, though, and resolute, I made my way to a big ol' boss. Or sort of a boss. It functions more like a stage hazard while you blast the hell out of the floating hitbox that doesn't really do anything. It's mostly dodging big AoEs and mobs that are summoned in. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Adding basic enemies into a boss encounter doesn't make it interesting. I'm open to being proven wrong, but you're gonna need some proof first. You can only actually do damage via either the lamp pulling her into the mortal realm or going into hers and then blasting. Not a lot of health, and the AoEs are all fairly intuitive. The most unique idea being one where you have to get to the center to be safe, but I'm not new to games, and this isn't a new concept. The design of the boss is pretty cool, though. It's model and all. So credit where it's due, but it would go down without much difficulty due to my newfound ability to hold up in endurance matches, and another beacon would be squeaky clean and golden. Oh no, the enemy that left earlier is back. And despite my best efforts to fight the dude, there's only so much I can do. Better players than I may be able to deal with massive lag spikes, but I have a really hard time trying to manage. I tend to play more on feeling than thought, and when feeling just isn't matching what I'm seeing, well... Also, for all of this game's issues, you can pet the dog. So it's not all bad. I left to farm out a ton of XP because survival is hard, and then I couldn't find the boss arena, so I gave up on that and made my way to a completely different part of the world. One that had a constantly terrible frame rate, and it was genuinely hard to play for all of the wrong reasons. By the point that I got to the area's boss, I couldn't tell if they were just moving incredibly slowly, or if their almost slideshow-like speed was due to the game running as if through mildly wet cement. With them being so slow, though, it was really just a matter of space and kill. I did get a taste of my own medicine upon finding a boss that liked to use holy beams of death, but I wasn't going to take that lying down. With their ability to heal, I figured that I needed to deal damage quick, and I was going to do that via my angels, as usual. You know the old saying, fight lasers with lasers? It's not for tactical reasons, so much as just down to the fact that lasers are cool. Alternatives can include very aggressively going boop from a range. Yeah, you know you want to go back to the lasers. Getting back to giving the team some credit, the red and whites in this place made for a gorgeous palette. The contrast here versus the previous locales? Chef's kiss. To help things along, I took a little side adventure to a side area. The place was genuinely pretty cool, though the results within it were fairly... varied. At the end of it was a really easy crossbow-centric sword person, and I know it's probably a minor complaint in the grand scheme of things, but can we stop having iron and steel flex like they're made of foam in video games? That's not how armor moves. After a really uneventful fight, my character pulls out the strategy of doing literally nothing to prevent the incredibly preventable Phase 2. Poor play, but now I gotta deal with an incredibly easy boss. Pretty much everything in their kit comes with a huge amount of telegraphing. The ranged attacks are more emotionally overwhelming than they are hard to deal with. Even they come out really slowly, so dodging through things got me a really comfortable first try victory over a fight that at least looks like it's meant to be more imposing. But I'm not really sure. From there, I fought a boss that does almost nothing to close distance. It has a gimmick where upon death, it'll sort of try to chase you down and explode, which is a basic enemy gimmick, not a boss gimmick. It's just a slow-moving punching bag. After that, I was able to get into a tower that basically has you going to the top and then going down layer by layer. It's fine, if overly simplistic. The lantern interactions and levers don't really fix that, and I hate to use a gaming giant as a comparison here, but I think I would compare it to Elden Ring with its towers. It was a while back now, but I still have vivid memories of working out the correct path up and down those things, and getting down to fight a godskin was a hell of an experience as early into the game as I did it. This was fine. Partway down, though, I got the thing that I needed to continue a dude's quest, then chase him across the world and into a new one so that I could take his book. I ruined this whole man's life so that I could steal his book. With this world, that may or may not include his afterlife. Having been sitting on the materials to do so for a while, I fully upgraded it, and made my way to fight a boss, now having a holy cannon for an arm. It may have burned through mana at breakneck speeds, but what better way to break necks via beams of light? Well, I'll tell ya. More light beams! Get lasered, bit! Of course, this is a phase 2. I still would occasionally use mana items just to speed up fights, but still, this fight and many like it were more or less a formality by this point. I don't have a ton of spells, but I have enough to just pile on damage at the low cost of handling the smell of burning flesh. Another beacon down. Or up? And as far as my strategy for traversing non-boss encounters, the lightning spell puts in a lot of work. It works fairly inconsistently, but there's nothing quite like killing from comfort. I eventually found my way to the rune of the demon god, while also accidentally getting not hearken in on things. He sort of just showed up, so I don't know how, why, or how exactly you're supposed to go about avoiding it, but regardless, the boss basically just targeted him the whole time. Not that it seems scary either way. He decided to take the rune. Not that I really care, but I was on my way to a big old castle kind of deal when I got another reason to appreciate spell diversity. These bastards have been a thorn in my side for too damn long. After being attacked for somehow not being radiant enough, despite everything, I would fight a boss that honestly has end boss sort of vibes. Admittedly pretty lackluster end boss vibes, but don't tell me this doesn't look like a final showdown. And I'm not sure how you're supposed to deal with the arrow from the sky spam she does, but this build works off of two of my favorite words to pair together when building things. Brute and force. Of course, that was merely the first phase. The second phase is where things would get serious. By which I also mean underwhelming, but this time in red. Ooh, fancy. The Angels worked great for handling teleporting enemies. They'll still track things at a range where most things won't. These things were really a lot more effective than I thought they'd be. Even disappointing as they were by not being true summons, they were quite nice. Also, boop. After one last beacon, I was finally into the home stretch. At least, sort of. There very much are still bosses left. Such as the same dragon and dude combo that have had harassing me throughout the game. But given the dialogue being the exact same, the fight being, I think, the same, and him never being addressed outside of potentially incredibly fast encounters, he just had no real staying power as a villain. It was like being harassed by somebody named Kevin, who shows up with a shiv sometimes and threatens to steal your identity to send people slightly inappropriate postcards, but nobody uses those anymore. And you saw him trying to log into his own computer last week, and he was struggling for 10 minutes before asking for help, only to find out that the num and caps lock were both on, and the Q key got stuck. Overall, you're being directly threatened, but it's really hard to be intimidated by this level of competence. Dodge the dragon, avoid the creepy guy who's after your lamp, blind him permanently. Soon after it came, wow, it's Harkin. Not really sure what brought him to try to attack me. I suppose he simply wished that he could be so grossly incandescent. And to you, my acquaintance, I have but one thing to say. Laser! 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 Fine, I'll heal. Heal with laser! Wait, there was a boss here? I have the footage, so I guess I killed a boss here, but I don't remember them at all. Weird. Ew, lava level. Gross. After a lot of mobbing and exploring some huge areas would come what I would consider to be the final boss. We'll get to that in a bit, but this is a huge arena kind of dude with a health bar befitting a king. And he Anki. And he's easy. Would he be harder as a melee fight? Maybe. I don't honestly think so. He closes gaps incredibly well. His AoEs are huge. I'm fairly sure you'd either have to block or dodge his attacks with any build. And with a tiny moveset as well as incredibly slow attacks for a fight this far into the game, well, you're seeing me kind of effortlessly dodge through most of his attacks on my first try. I had never seen this guy before this attempt, but he's easier to read than a book for children. And again, the iframes this game gives you are incredibly generous. I wouldn't consider myself to be good at these sorts of games, so to get here and feel so unchallenged is odd. I wish there was more here to say about the king, but that's all there is. Ye old ranged boop! After would come the game's version of the final boss, and it's just a gimmick fight. You're on a timer to kill a bunch of basic mobs before the god kills you. And I said before, this game is sad. It's full of bugs of all shapes and sizes. Falling through the world, crashing, constant frame issues, numbers constantly lying to you, inputs just not reading. There's a lot. The story is underwhelming, the gameplay is inconsistent, and it's sad. Because it feels like it is so close. I don't want this to be a bad game. I, like so many people, wanted to put my faith in the devs, in their passion as artists to deliver, learn from past mistakes, and finally give us the vision they had, but I don't think I can even blame them. In the time it took me to beat it, write the script, and likely edit the video, they just keep releasing more updates. They're still working on it. I don't know what things are or aren't like over there, but to me, that says a few things. It could mean they care immensely. They're working themselves into the ground because this was a passion project, and releasing like this was a genuine mistake. It could be that they're desperate to make things work because they're people and they have mouths to feed, or with the industry as a whole, it wasn't them at all. How often do the artists get to say when something is done? And with them working to release things so quickly, I'm inclined to believe that it's just a classic story of not enough time, not enough budget, artists being rushed, and this is what we got. This hurts me to see because on some level, I enjoyed my time with this game, but every moment of enjoyment was marred with a significantly stronger feeling of, well, quite the opposite, mostly just frustration. There are real living and breathing people behind this that all have their own wants, needs, and dreams. I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what their environment is like, but to each and every one of the devs, I hope that you can find the light at the end of this journey. Revel in the radiance, and one day finally have the time you need to deliver the peace that you deserve. Whatever the future may bring for you, I still believe that you're close to something great. For everyone's sake, don't stop reaching for it. With that, though, I hope you enjoyed your time here. You probably know how to use social media, and I hope that means I'll get to hear your thoughts now and on future outings. Thank you to my lovely channel members for your continued generosity. I am many things, but perfect is none of them, so it's always reassuring to see. Until the next, remember to stay safe, spread some kindness in the world, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.